So as I mentioned before, I'm really happy to be here to tell you about how we think you could get credit and recognition for method development. My name is Gabriel Gasque, and I am head of outreach in protocols.io. And before we begin with the material of this presentation, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have a PhD in experimental neuroscience and did my postdoc in neurogenetics. Before joining protocols.io, about a year ago, I was an editor and a team manager in the open access journal PLOS Biology, which is the flagship journal of the Public Library of Science. So the focus of this presentation is about the incentives for sharing experimental methods in protocols.io or in any other outlet or repository. Just some general housekeeping. As I said before, I am recording this presentation, which I will share with all of you, and I will also share the slides. At the end, we are going to have time for questions, but you should feel free to type those questions at any moment in either the chat window or the Q&A window of Zoom. If I spot those questions, I might stop to answer them, but if I don't worry, we will get to them at the end of the presentation. This is not an introduction to protocols.io, and my presentation presumes basic knowledge of the platform. For basic information about protocols.io, you can check our recurrent webinars, which you can find in this URL, protocols.io/webinars. You can also check pre-recorded tutorials at protocols.io/tutorials, or you can request a one-to-one demo with one of our specialists at protocols.io/help/demo. As I said before, this is not an introduction to protocols.io, and it presumes some basic knowledge of the platform. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, we gotta start with today's agenda, which you should be able to see on the screen. So we will talk a little bit about the history of reporting methods and of method development and optimization not getting the recognition as worthy of a standalone publication and not getting the credit that it deserves. And that started, however, to change about 20 years ago as methods started being recognized as an important modular output of research. We will also cover the different ways of sharing and getting credit in protocols.io. So for the first part, let's go a little bit back in history. So the journal Nature Methods actually started only in 2004. And what you read on the screen, it's an excerpt from the inaugural editorial in which the founding editors said their goal was to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods, because major methodological developments take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast, the methods sections of specialized journals, although extremely useful for the targeted peer groups, do not grant technical information the wide exposure conducive of interdisciplinary exchanges. And we will touch on this a little bit more later on. But behind the scenes, what we learned from the founding editor-in-chief of Nature Methods, Veronique Himmer, who later became chief scientific officers at the Public Library of Science, is that there was a lot of skepticism even in Nature Publishing Group, around launching Nature methods, because they said that Nature published research and that nobody was going to read just methods, and that these could dilute their brand. And it would be impossible to fill a journal's pages with just methods and so on. However, as we all know, Nature Methods was a huge success and continues to be. But I think it is interesting to think about the skepticism of giving methods independent credit as recently as 2004. But now, if we look more recently, within the last 10 years, there are a lot of journals focusing and publishing protocols and methods. Some examples are shown in this slide, and I don't think that the list is exhaustive. Big publishers like Springer Nature keep expanding their portfolio of methods-centered journals, like Nature Protocols that started 2 years after they launched Nature Methods, and now also Protocol Exchange, and Elsevier that launched Star Protocols and Methods X. And there are some other independent initiatives like Jovi, Bioprotocols, and some others. It seems, therefore, that we are now in a place where journals, funders, and many researchers have started to realize it is not just code and data that we should be sharing. In that sense, you might all recall that it was in the late 90s when we started to move away from please contact authors for code and data to use a specialized data and code repositories like GitHub, Dryad, Figshare, and Open Science Framework. And although methods have been playing catch up, sharing them is becoming the norm, and you have now more choices on where and how to communicate those methods. Okay, that's enough about the changes that we have seen in recent times. I will go on now to talk about public sharing and getting credit for reproducible and discoverable protocols in protocols.io. And specifically about protocols.io, we will go through first how most people share their methods in our platform. That is, independently of papers. Then we will talk about the partnership that we have with PLOS ONE to get your protocols peer-reviewed and published as a formal peer-reviewed manuscript, as well as the many partnerships and connections that we have with many other journals, which aim to make your papers more rigorous and more reproducible. So, when we see how scientists communicate their work and their discoveries to their colleagues and to the world more broadly, we have started to see a more modular approach to science communication. So, at the center of this cartoon, we have the most recognized research output, which is the peer-reviewed publication, the paper. And this is the bread and butter, the currency that you put on your CVs and that funders and your employers will be looking at when evaluating your productivity. But we now appreciate more the value of other independent but interrelated modules of research output, like code, data, and we have created specific repository for these, like GitHub, Open Science Framework, Dryad, Zenodo, and others. Methods are another module of research output. And in fact, methods are really the linchpin to reuse, and the ongoing value of all the other items here hinges on having the methods. Because I venture to claim that it is really difficult, if not impossible, to understand the meaning of the data and of any interpretation of this data if we don't understand the details of how these results, how these data were acquired. And this is where protocols.io comes in, because we are an online open access repository and a platform for authors to create, share, and publish dynamic, interactive, versionable, and detailed protocols before, during, and after publication of a research article. And I would need to clarify here that what we at protocols.io understand as a publication is similar to pre-printing an article in bioRxiv, for example. Protocols.io is a repository for methods. We are not a peer-reviewed journal. For journals, publication is different because for them, it is the result of a peer review process. However, as we will discuss later on, protocols deposited in protocols.io are citable and can be part of a peer-reviewed publication or even be peer-reviewed as a standalone methodological article. If you are not familiar with protocols.io at all, please take a look at the URL at the bottom right of this slide. This link will take you to the welcome page, which is a great place to start familiarizing yourself with the platform. As I said before, one of the features of protocols.io is its open access repository, in which there are now over 14,000 published protocols. And they are all published under a CC BY license, making them completely open access and free to read, use, and reuse. In this open access platform, it is also free to create an account and to publish an unlimited number of protocols in the open access repository. But there are also over 55,000 private protocols, which have been created by users who are developing, optimizing, and perhaps just sharing their protocols with their immediate colleagues. And this is the business model of protocols.io. As we charge institutions for these private collaborative workspaces, and many universities, funders, and other institutions have such licenses. The free accounts have only a limited number of private files. So if you make your protocols and publish them right away, the free account can work for everyone. But we charge users to take advantage of unlimited private space. And something I want to point out is that last year alone, in 2022, more than 2 million people came to the repository to read the public protocols. And most of these public protocols are not linked to a specific peer-reviewed article. They are simply sitting in protocols.io. And we'll talk about people's motivations to share independently of a paper. But what I want to point out is that despite this independent sharing, there is a lot of traffic to the protocols. About 60% of all traffic to our public protocols comes from Google searches, which means that people are organically finding the protocols. And geographically speaking, only about 30% of the traffic to our protocols comes from the US, and the rest is from all over the world, which means that there is a really global reach once you publish the protocols in the platform. And when you come to protocols.io, you can also search directly if you want to look for specific protocols that might be useful in your research. So let me show you an example. So what you see on the screen now is the landing page. So you can do searches for protocols that might be useful for you. Let's say single cell PCR. And you have a list of all public protocols that have single cell and PCR as a keyword or as keywords. You can open and read any of these protocols. It is very easy to create your own copy or fork to modify it according to your own needs. For example, to adapt this particular protocol to your own equipment or to your own primers or bacteria or mouse lines. And you can also run the protocol directly from the computer or tablet. So you click the run button, and now you can follow the experiment step by step. Even if you notice something unusual or make a mistake, you can add a note to that run of the protocol. And at the end, you can save the record of that protocol in your account as an independent file. So now let me go back to the presentation. You can also search, and not only for protocols, but for communities. For example, what you see here to the right, it's an open community about research on coronavirus. Let me show you the example. Just give me a second. Oh, sorry. I wanted to show you an example, but I made a mistake. Okay. Here we are. So again, we open the landing page. We can search for coronavirus. And again, the first list is the publications, but you can also search for what we call workspaces, which are these communities of method-centered collaboration. You can see specifically this one has over 600 members and 600 discussions and 272 publications. And again, you're free to access these public protocols. You can create copies and you can run them. Now let's talk about the motivations to publish your detailed protocols, not necessarily in order of importance, but a first advantage of making your protocols public is that, going back to the concept of modular communication of research outputs, by using specialized repositories for publishing your data, code, and particularly your methods, you are increasing their discoverability and potential reuse, which should lead to increased credit and recognition. And I would like to use an example here, taken from Twitter. So you can see a tweet from a researcher who was looking for a protocol for RNA extraction from primary cortical neurons in culture. Someone answered this tweet and recommended a protocol that is in protocols.io. And this protocol is actually part of a paper that was published in the journal GigaScience. But the paper was about a fish parasite. So the chances of researchers working on primary cortical neurons in culture finding a paper on a fish parasite as a means of finding a method that would work for them seemed really slim. But because the protocol was published independently in a specialized repository, it made the method more discoverable and increased the chances of people reusing it. And once the protocol is published, the platform keeps a record of all traffic and use of this protocol, including number of views, bookmarks, exports, copies, comments, and citations. Another reason for making your methods public is to increase reproducibility, transparency, and accountability. If you are not familiar with this, I will introduce to you the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project, which was a $1.5 million initiative coordinated by the Center for Open Science and by Science Exchange, with the goal of trying to independently replicate almost 200 experiments from about 50 high-profile papers on cancer biology. What the Reproducibility Project researchers discovered very soon after the project began is that it is extremely difficult to replicate previously published work. And there are several reasons why this is the case. But one of them is that the original researchers didn't document in their articles with enough detail what they did and how they did it. So what you see on this slide is the Center for Open Science website that summarizes some of the results of the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project. As you can see, of the 193 experiments that they tried to replicate from 53 articles, 0% of the protocols were completely described, which made it impossible to reproduce them without contacting the original authors. Equally striking, when researchers from the Reproducibility Project contacted the original authors, they also discovered that these did not always could tell how exactly their own experiments had been done. Therefore, the problem of lack of reproducibility goes beyond the lack of adequate reporting in published articles, but also highlights deficiencies in the way researchers keep record of their own experimental protocols for housekeeping. And that brings me to a third reason to make your protocols public, which is to guarantee preservation. As we all know, a large fraction of the lab personnel is floating. Students graduate and leave, postdoctoral researchers become faculty elsewhere, and so on. Publishing your protocols makes them a persistent, citable object that will be permanently stored in your workspace as well as in the open access repository. And I should mention that all private and public content in protocols.io is mirrored and backed up in Clock, GitHub, and the Internet Archive, and that the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative has a code escrow of the platform. And early sharing also increases the chances of establishing collaborations, because we have seen cases where researchers report that publishing their detailed protocols leads to an increase in the number of collaborations. And one important thing to note is that since we launched in 2014, and now with these more than 14,000 published protocols, we have never, ever seen a case of a publisher saying that because you shared your protocols in protocols.io, you cannot publish your research or method paper in their journals. Publishers do not consider publishing in protocols.io prior publication. So just like sharing preprints in bioRxiv, sharing in protocols.io is like preprinting methods. And so we have never seen a case of that hurting authors. So we encourage people to share publicly whenever their protocols are ready. So from the publishing perspective, sharing on protocols.io should give your method visibility, let you engage with the people who are using the method, make it a central place where you can iterate and share corrections and optimizations easily, and guide everyone naturally to those new versions. And it does not preclude further recognition by publishing it later as part of a peer-reviewed publication. And that takes me to the final point, which is early publishing of protocols simplifies your work down the road when the time of submitting and publishing a paper comes. So let me use another example again from Twitter. Here, in this example, Professor Kipnis at Washington University in the United States tweets saying, "What if labs publish each of their unique methods, and in future papers, instead of rewriting the protocols, we just cite them? We waste so much time on methods by saying the same thing differently." And this is exactly what protocols.io is about. So you can publish your protocols in the open access repository, obtain a DOI, and cite this protocol in your paper, so you never have to write detailed methods sections again. And this is what the authors of this PROS biology paper did. They created, deposited, and published their protocols in protocols.io, obtaining a citable DOI, which they included in the materials and methods section, replacing most of the writing. The reader, by following the link that is now highlighted in red, has access to the detailed step-by-step protocol in protocols.io. And a really nice thing about how protocols.io works is that the protocols are versionable. So if the authors have updated their protocol since the time of publication, the reader will be notified. And they can choose to read the protocol as it was published, which is now highlighted in gray, or by following the link, they can read the newer version, or both. And that brings me to the fact that because there is a push for reproducibility, there are now over 500 journals, some open access, some subscription journals, that encourage authors in their submission guidelines to include in their manuscript a link to the detailed protocols in protocols.io. This also applies to many funders, now encouraging or requiring detailed methods sharing. And remember that I said that we have never had an issue with authors not being able to publish a paper for publishing their protocol first. In fact, not only journals do not see a conflict with publishing your protocols early in protocols.io, they often actively encourage the use of the platform. And before we move on to the next section, I would like to show you how easy it is to publish a protocol in protocols.io. So I am opening my account. That's what you see on the screen. This is my account. And there are a series of protocols here that haven't been published. And to publish one of these protocols, I just select it, click the publish button, and that takes me to 6 very easy steps to collect metadata, which shouldn't take you more than 7 to 10 minutes to complete. And once you publish the protocol, it becomes permanent and citable, receiving a DOI. And I would like now to move to the third point of the agenda, which is a very specific partnership that we have established with the journal PLOS ONE, and which fits within this narrative of the methods renaissance, because the idea is to bring more credit and recognition to method development. And this partnership is that within +1, there is a new article type called lab protocol. And this collaboration is about turning your protocols in protocols.io into a peer-reviewed publication. Now, just to clarify, if you're interested in getting your protocols peer-reviewed and published as a protocol article, you do not have necessarily to publish with +1. There are other several journals that are specialized in publishing methods, techniques, and protocols. You know your fields, you know your audience, and you know the appropriate journals. But +1 is a pretty broad, welcoming journal. And one of the reasons we are excited about this partnership is that the way they have defined the scope is that they are not expecting new experimental results. And they are welcoming to new protocols that might be extensions of something that has already been reported. And the idea is that if you published already a method, or someone else did, but your work has been to troubleshoot or to optimize it for example, new conditions, that this work of optimization or tweaking can be recognized. So with this collaboration, both +1 and protocols.io aim to grant credit, not only to the development of a whole brand new method, but also to the hard work put into optimizing and troubleshooting a protocol to make it work more efficiently or in a new condition. So the bar is set in a way that it recognizes a good and useful protocol. There should be some effort behind it, of course, but the idea is to capture the constant method development that very often goes unacknowledged and is usually just summarized in 1 or 2 sentences in the materials and method sections of manuscripts. And the integration between +1 and protocols.io means that the protocol is front and center of the paper. So let me open another example. So this is an example of a lab protocol article. And there is a link here that if I follow it, it will take me to the detailed protocol in the platform. And the paper receives additional badges that says that this protocol has been peer-reviewed and published in +1. And I can follow these badges. If I click here, I go back to the protocol. So the idea here is that, again, the protocol is the center of the manuscript. And we have had some lovely feedback from authors of some of these lab protocols papers that I'm showing you here. So Monica at the top notes that because her wastewater protocol received mass media attention, even featuring in a New York Times article, it meant that it made her famous within her small Latin American country. Next, we have Jacopo, who published the first lab protocol, which was also his first solo paper. And third, we have Simon, for whom this specific paper, his paper, was his first manuscript as a senior author, which was very meaningful for him and for his career. And now moving on to the last part of the talk about our partnerships with other journals. So I would like to start by saying that although we are all very familiar with supplementary files and documents in papers, there is a really good push for a number of years now to moving away from supplements by using repositories instead. And this is a really good article in The Scientist, the journal Scientist, about it, the magazine. And these are just some examples of papers that are published and the journals promoting deposition of the detailed protocols in protocols.io. And this is the kind of modular publishing that we have started seeing more and more, where the paper is the centerpiece. It is the story, but we have the data in NCBI, RSF, or other appropriate repository. The code is in GitHub, and now we have started to see more and more of the methods also going to a repository. And so we're seeing more trend. We're seeing some trend in scholarly publishing, moving away from vague methods sections to more rigorous, more reproducible method reporting. A published protocol in protocols.io with an assigned DOI is a citable object that can be referenced to in a paper, giving credit to the author's methodological work. The reference will also be linked to the protocol in protocols.io, so the reader has access to the interactive step-by-step protocol, even if the paper was published behind a paywall. So to summarize, by sharing early your methods in protocols.io, you should increase their discoverability, foster reproducibility, facilitate research connection, enable reuse of your methods, enhance value of research. These protocols are dynamic permanent, meaning that you can update them by versioning. This is also a way to improve your materials and methods, and leads to a better Q&A with the users of the methods. And with that, I will open the floor for questions, which you can type in the chat or in the Q&A. And we already have a comment. Let me see. Okay, let me see. The first question says, how the chat GPT and discoverability in protocols.io for reuse distinguished? So I'm not sure that I understood your question, but and I don't know specifically about chat GPT, but I know that if you Google, you would find protocols in protocols.io. As I mentioned before, about 60% of our traffic comes directly from Google searches. It is my understanding, although I'm not an expert, that ChatGPT gives you a summary of whatever it finds on the internet, but it doesn't necessarily provide direct citations. It is my recommendation that if you are going to use a protocol, you read the original source, either in the paper or in protocols.io. There is another question that says, global plus global health, we are submitting a research manuscript. After generating from the DOI from protocols.io, but not published yet, there were some changes in the manuscript. My question is, can I, after publishing in protocols.io, can I publish in PLOS Journal? Yes. So after publishing in protocols.io, you can still publish in the PLOS Journal. If you have published your protocol in protocols.io and you need to make changes to that protocol, once published, the protocol is not editable, but you can create a new version that would incorporate the changes that you have to make. Did I answer your questions? I didn't mention it. Let me explain. If you want to obtain a DOI, but you don't want to make your protocol public yet, there is a button that says publish. This will make your protocol public and will receive a DOI. There is a way to reserve a DOI without making the protocol public. So instead of selecting publish, you select reserve DOI. You will have to go to the same 6 steps. The protocol will be made permanent and it will receive a DOI, but it will not be published. So you can have a DOI to share with the journal and just make it public whenever you know that the paper will be published. So you can choose either to publish and receive a DOI or just to reserve a DOI. Any other questions? I'm going to stop the recording just in case somebody wants to ask a question of the record.